Data plays a huge role in the success of many businesses today, which is why the demand for skilled business analysts is growing. It's a career that's not only growing fast but also critical to helping businesses thrive in today's competitive landscape. If you're preparing for a job in this field, you know interviews can get pretty intense. According to industry trends, companies are increasingly looking for candidates who not only know how to handle data but can also use it to drive business decisions. In this video, I'll be walking you through 25 business analytics interview questions that will help you get a better understanding of what to expect. We'll cover everything from the typical business terms, scenario based questions revolving around data, to analyzing how you approach real world business challenges. Whether you're just starting out or want to refine your skills, this video will give you the insights and confidence to ace your next interview. So let's get started. So, our first question is, what is UML modeling? Right, so in cases where you're working in on designing a really complex system, say it's a new software tool or an app, and you want to explain all the parts of the system. Again, this can get pretty messy, right? Because your system will have so many components. So this is where UML comes in the picture. UML is basically Unified Modeling Language. So this is like a blueprint for your system. Right. So what modeling language basically does is it helps you sketch out everything that connects in your system. It basically makes your work super easy when it comes to explanations. So, like we discussed, it helps in visualizing and specifying, constructing, documenting all the software system designs. It is a visual language. It basically identifies the errors or the gaps that are present in the design phase, so that later on in the development phase there are no errors, and they can be identified in the early stages itself. It is basically like creating a visual map to help all your stakeholders develop a better understanding of the system. So basically, it uses diagrams to show how all the components are laid out and how they interact with each other, creating a nice flow for all the stakeholders involved to get a better idea of it, right? Whether they have a technical understanding or not, they can be on the same page. So, UML basically focuses on making these complex ideas simple enough to be explained, which in turn ensures clear communication, and it basically gives a plan that's scalable and reliable for the future, right? So, our second question is, what do you understand by feasibility study? Now, feasibility study is a detailed study or a detailed analysis that considers all the critical aspects of a project in order to understand or in order to determine the likelihood of its success, right? So whenever we start with a project, we need to know whether it has the possibility or there is a chance of it being a success. So this is where feasibility study comes in the picture. So let's take an example. Say you have a project idea which is really amazing, and whoever you tell the idea to, they instantly get excited about it. But before you start working on this idea and you invest financially and invest your time, there is one question that you need to answer, right? Can it actually be done? Will it give the output that you have in mind? This is why you need feasibility study. You basically study, you try to analyze all the aspects, be it technical or non-technical, and you gather a basic idea or a basic understanding of the topic, right? Will it smoothly fit into how business works today? Or will it create chaos? You need to answer questions like this. You need to answer basic questions like, does it align with the business idea present currently? Will the users like something like this coming in the market? Now, the other factor you need to consider is economic, right? Is there the economic feasibility present in your project idea? As the term suggests, you need to consider the financial aspects. Is it worth the investment? Will you get the desired ROI that you had in mind? Basically, in simple terms, it should make sense money wise, right? So, feasibility study is basically an assessment that evaluates the viability of your project or solution. And by viability, we mean the success rate of your project, right? It basically uncovers the strengths and weaknesses of an existing business or proposed venture, and it identifies the risks early on, right? So, our third question is, what is invest? Now, invest is not the regular term over here, but rather it is an abbreviation for independent, negotiable, valuable, estimable, small, and testable. Now, what do these terms mean? First, let's understand the invest framework, right? So, the invest framework acts as a checklist. Now, whenever we have a lot of things on our mind, we need a checklist to ensure that we do not miss out on anything, right? So this invest framework is a checklist in business terms. It helps us to make sure that the user stories are good to go. Now, you must be wondering what's a user story. So, user story is basically an informal or general explanation of a software feature by the end user or customer. So, that is what is called a user story in business terms. So, now that we know what invest is, like we have a basic idea, let's understand what these terms mean over here, right? So, the first one is independent. Now, stories can be developed separately without dependencies. Now, stories being our user features or our user communicated features, they should be able to be developed separately. That is, they shouldn't have any sort of dependency on each other. That is, they shouldn't have any sort of dependency on each other, right? Every feature, every user story should be able to stand on its own without relying too much on the other stories. This makes things very easy to manage and to maintain later on, right? The next one is negotiable. Now, negotiable basically means that stories should be flexible and they should be able to evolve over time or maybe even during a discussion, right? No user feature should be super rigid that it is not able to flow with the current trend, right? So it should be able to change as the team talks it through, right? The next one what we have is valuable. So each story delivers clear value to the customer or the business, right? Every story should deliver something useful to the customer or the business. If it's not adding value, then why even do it, right? That's the first question that arises. So the next one what we have is estimable. Now, the team can estimate the effort required to complete the story. The team needs to be able to guess how much effort it will take. So it needs to have some sort of estimate value. It needs this particular time frame to be able to complete it, right? If a team takes up a task that is non-estimable, that is, they're not able to guess a particular time frame for it or not able to guess the amount of effort it will be required, it gets really difficult to manage the tasks, right? So every user story needs to have some sort of estimate. That is, it needs to be estimable. Then the next one what we have is small. Story should be able to be broken down into manageable, bite-sized tasks, right? Something that the team can handle within a short time frame. Then the last one what we have is testable. They are the clear acceptance criteria to verify the story's completion. You need to clear acceptance criteria so that you know when a story is done and it is working as expected. So this is a very important criteria whenever you're building something. You need to know the end point of it, right? So if we were to summarize the invest framework, it would be all about making sure your user stories or your user suggested features are clear, valuable, and doable, which helps keep the project flowing smoothly, right? So, moving on to our next question. So, our fourth question is, why should one prefer Kano analysis? So, now in order to answer this question, first let's understand what is Kano analysis, and we'll do this with the help of an example. So, say you have an idea for an application and your mind is basically overflowing with the number of features that that application can have. But now the problem here is you cannot sit and add every feature in your application, especially in the very first phase or the very first cycle of your production, mainly for two reasons. Firstly, it would consume a lot of time, and secondly, you cannot afford to invest a lot in the initial phase itself. And by invest, I mean your time, money, and energy, right? So now the important question is which feature to add. Now the important question is which features to add or which features to keep in the first launch of the app and which features to eliminate, right? So now the Kano analysis helps you figure out which features. Now the Kano analysis helps you figure out which features matter most to your users by breaking them down into three main categories. The first one is the basic needs. Second one is the performance needs. And lastly, we have our delighter features, right? So let's look at them in detail. So the basic needs are like the must-haves, right? They need to be there in the application. So without these, there's a huge possibility that the users will not even like your application in the first place. So it could be the basic needs like your app should not take a lot of time to load, or your app should not crash, firstly frequently, and secondly not at all, right? So these are like the things that the users expect without even thinking. In today's fast paced world, imagine your app taking 2 minutes or 3 minutes to jump from one feature to the other. Users are not going to prefer something like that. So you need to keep up with the basic needs for your application in the very first launch. Then the next one that we have is the performance needs. Now these are the things that the users ask for, right? The more you deliver these, the happier they're going to be. So say for example, a faster search function or extra customization options. Now in today's era, everybody loves customization, right? The more a user can customize the application according to their needs, the more they're going to like your application, or the more preferred that application is going to be. So the better these features are, the more satisfied your users are going to feel. Then the final category is the delighter features. Now these are the unexpected surprises that will make your customers go like, wow, I didn't know I needed this, but now I love it. So these delighter features should have this kind of effect on your users or the target audience or the market that you're targeting. Delighter features are also the features that make your product stand out and give a complete competitive edge to it. So this is Kano analysis. It not only saves you from wasting time on the features that the customers don't care about, but also keeps you focused on what really matters, right? So in the end, it's all about creating a product that hits the right balance between expectation and excitement for your users. So again, it enables informed decision making based on customer satisfaction versus cost. And lastly, the features that customers explicitly demand, the better they are, the higher the satisfaction. Now, our next question is, what do you understand by gap analysis and what are the different types? Now, gap analysis is something that helps you figure out the distance or the gap between where you are currently and where you want to be, or your desired state. And the gap analysis helps to bridge this very gap or this very distance with the help of an action plan. Simple enough? So, say whenever you are running a business, you will have some goals set for your business. But when you look at the numbers of the performance, you realize you're not quite there yet. That is where gap analysis comes in the picture, right? It will help you figure out what's missing and how to get where you want to be. So it gets super easy for you to bridge this gap between your current state and your desired state or your future state of a process, product, or system. It also helps you identify the key areas of improvement and determine the steps needed to bridge this gap. That is basically the action plan that we talked about. Right? So once you have the strategies or a plan laid out for your journey, it gets super easy to reach there. But you just know where you want to be, but you do not have a map for it. So this gap analysis basically acts as a map showing you the distance to your treasure, right? It aligns with your current performance. It helps you align your current performance with your strategic goals. Then the next part of your question is, what are the different types? So the types of gap analysis are performance, product, market, compliance, and strategic, right? So performance gap is basically when your actual performance is falling short of what you expected. Then there's your product gap, where your offerings or your products aren't quite keeping up with what the market wants or what your competitors are doing. Then there is market gap. So this is when your customer needs are not being met, or there is an opportunity in the market that your competitors haven't tapped into yet. Then there is compliance gap. This happens when you're not meeting certain regulations or certain standards for your product or services. And then lastly, we have the strategic gap analysis. So this basically aims to determine what specific steps a company can take to achieve a particular goal, right? Then we have our sixth question. Explain the requirement elicitation techniques. Requirement elicitation techniques are basically the different methods you use to gather all the important details from the stakeholders. So, when you're starting a new project, one of the most important things to do first is to figure out exactly what everyone needs from the system or the product. That is, what are the views and the demands of the various stakeholders involved, right? So, the main objective is to gather the requirements from the stakeholders for a project or a system. It ensures a comprehensive understanding of the stakeholder needs. Now, there are going to be several stakeholders involved whenever you're starting a new project, right? And all these stakeholders involved are going to have different views and different opinions about every idea or every feature of your project. Now, to ensure that you understand and you understand it correctly, you require these methods in order to reduce the risk of misunderstandings or missed requirements, right? Basically, as the number of stakeholders involved increases, so does the difficulty of managing them. And to ensure that all their ideas are implemented, along with keeping in mind the goals and the objectives of the business, we need requirement elicitation techniques. So, these are some of the common methods or the common techniques for requirement elicitation. The first one we're going to look at is interviews. So you sit down with the stakeholders and you ask them directly what are their needs and expectations regarding the project or the idea that is to be implemented, right? But if you're dealing with a larger group, you might use techniques like surveys or questionnaires to collect the data efficiently. Then the next method is workshop, where you can bring everyone together and you can brainstorm ideas and you can work out the details together, right? The other approach is observation. This is where you watch the users in action. You see how they work with the existing systems so that you can understand the challenges that they face and you can come up with better techniques for your product. Then the next one is prototyping. This is where you build a rough version, right? You build a rough version or a dummy version of the system and you let the users interact with it. This will help you refine your requirements based on real time or actual feedbacks, right? Then the last one that you have is document analysis. So this is where you review your existing materials like the process documents or old reports and you gather the background information. So these requirement elicitation techniques are all about using the different approaches to make sure you gather all the necessary insights and you build the right product or system. It helps you avoid misunderstandings and ensure that everyone's needs are heard. Then our next question is scenario based. So the question goes like this: you're asked to analyze a drop in sales for a particular product. What would your process be? Now, this is a question that is asked to test your presence of mind and how would you deal in a particular situation, right? So, if you're faced with a drop in sales for a product, the first thing you want to do is not panic. Rather, you can follow a strategy similar to this one. So, this is how you start your answer, right? You will first start with data collection. So, you will first start with data collection. That is, you need to gather all the sales data you can. You will have to look at the older records. You will have to see how the product had been selling all this time, right? You have to check the graphs. You need to see how the product changed its course. You need to check how the product changed its selling course over the time. You also have to hear from customers. Are they leaving reviews? Are they leaving any complaints? Or are they providing any feedback? And do not forget to check what the competition is doing. How are they performing in the market? This will give you a more clear understanding of the entire picture or the bigger picture, right? The next thing you can do is conduct an internal analysis. Now, internal analysis will help you focus on analyzing whether there is something that's changed with the product itself. Maybe there's been a shift in pricing or the marketing isn't as effective as before. You also want to look at how promotions and discounts have been handled. It's all about finding out if anything that you did internally could have triggered the drop, right? So, this is internal analysis. Then the third strategy you can follow is external factors. So you will first start with data collection. This means that you need to gather all the sales data that you can. You have to look at the historical sales data, that is basically the older records of how your product had been performing in the past and how it changed over time, right? You need to also hear from the customers. You need to check whether they're leaving any reviews or they're making complaints or are they providing any sort of feedback. And another important thing is to check what the competition is doing, right? You need to see how they are performing in the market as well. The next thing you can do is internal analysis. Now, internal analysis will completely focus on analyzing whether there is something that is changed with the product itself. Maybe there's been a shift in pricing, or maybe the marketing isn't as effective as before, or you would also want to look at how promotions and the discounts have been changed. It's all about finding out whether there is any internal analysis. It's all about finding out if anything you did internally could have triggered the drop, right? It could even be reviewing the product quality, the features, or the availability, and assessing marketing strategies and their effectiveness, which again comes under promotions. And the next way we can analyze is through the external factors. Now, the external factors are basically the bigger market trends happening or the customer preferences changing, right? There could be some kind of shift in the customer behavior or their preferences, or there could be a new competitor in the market, or it could even be the economic conditions that are making your customers spend less, right? Then the next technique is customer analysis. Now you need to specify a group of customers who are no longer buying your product. What is changed with them? This is basically segmenting the customer base. You need to identify whether they are switching to other product. You need to figure out whether they are switching to another product, or is their buying behavior shifting in some way, right? There could even be a possibility of some eco-friendly product being launched and your customer base or the segment that shifting towards these kind of product. Then the next one is hypothesis and testing. So once you have come up with all this information, you can come up with some sort of hypothesis. Like maybe the price is too high, or the product isn't meeting customer needs anymore. Then you would test these hypotheses using the data you've collected in the very first step, right? And then finally, you have an action plan. Based on all the above steps, based on everything, you come up with an action plan. This could mean n number of things depending on your situation. But the most common ones are adjusting the price. Maybe you need to rework your marketing strategy, or it could even mean improving the product itself. It could be the product quality or the product features, n number of things, right? Whatever steps are taken, it is very crucial to monitor the results and make sure that the changes are having the desired effect, right? So let's move on to our eighth question, which is again a scenario based question. A project is midway through execution and the budget is being cut by 20%. How would you adjust the project plan? Now, let's understand the scenario first. So, you are working on a project. Basically, your company has assigned you some sort of project, and when you're midway through it, that is only 50% of the project has been completed, and now you get to know that your budget has been cut by 20%, right? So, whatever you had in mind about the project, whatever you had planned for the budget, your finances have to be readjusted now. So you need to tell the interviewer how would you adjust the project plan. Now here you need to lay out a very neat and clean ideation of how you would tackle the situation, right? So we know it's not an ideal situation, but it is very common where businesses have had to cut losses, where businesses have had to cut costs halfway through the project, right? You might have heard of a lot of companies implementing such budget cuts, right? So all you have to do here is talk about some of the cost cutting techniques that can be implemented in a situation like this one, right? So the first one is ensuring proper allocation of resources. Now this is our first cost cutting technique. Okay, so whenever you start any project, resource planning is one of the most important steps. It is not just about making sure you have the people and the tools you need, it's more about doing it before the work starts, right? Why do we do this? Because if you don't allocate resources properly from the start, you will risk overshooting the budget or running into major delays. So, what are your major resources that you should look into? One would be people, the equipments, and the time that will be required, right? So, these are your major resources. These three things are the core of your project success. Now, you need to keep in mind that time is a very important factor. You can say the key factor over here. For example, a critical resource might only be available for a short time. If that's the case, you'll need to adjust your project schedule accordingly. A critical resource, now, say for example, you work in a company whose main goal is to promote the YouTube channel, right? And you lack the video editors over here. You have very few resources of video editors. And now you find one video editor who is available only for, say, 1 week. It could be some sort of freelancing, right? So now over here, 1 week, this is your time factor here, which is very crucial. Now you need to keep in mind whenever you come up with any sort of plan for your project or for any video that you roll out, you will need to keep in mind about this key factor over here, which is the time. So now in this case, you will have to adjust all your project schedules according to this particular resource, which is your video editor, who is available only for 1 week, right? Or maybe there could be a situation where your resource is not available until later, which means you will have to extend the project timeline to according to the availability of that particular resource, right? So moving on to our next cost cutting factor, which is mentor and retrain your team. So it is important to avoid hiring last minute resources or last minute employees. Firstly, it is expensive, and secondly, you will have to make them accustomed to the business goals and the ideas of your organization, right? And that is again going to consume a lot of time. So instead, you should focus on mentoring and retraining the existing team. This is again more cost effective, and it also ensures the underqualified people aren't holding things up, right? Having senior team members guide the junior ones not only reduces costs but also boosts the overall team agility and motivation. So again, this is a very efficient step that you can implement whenever there is a situation like this, right? The third one is outsource on an as needed basis. So whenever it comes to non-core tasks, you look into outsourcing. By outsourcing specific tasks to say cheaper or specialized resources, you can control costs without compromising the quality of the project. Now, this factor over here can have a huge advantage as well when it comes to cost cutting, but it also has a disadvantage when it comes to depending on an outsource. Whenever your organization is going to take up outsourcing method, there is going to be some sort of dependency on another organization. So say that business shuts down or raises the cost all of a sudden. So it is again going to create a problem for your organization. So you need to keep these factors in mind. And if you have some sort of plan for handling the disadvantages, then outsourcing can be a really good option when it comes to cost cutting. Then our fourth one is account for hidden and unexpected costs. So we know whenever we're working on some project, it never goes exactly as you planned it or exactly how you ideated it to be. You need to make sure that you reserve some sort of budget for the unexpected costs. Now, these unexpected costs could be the last minute expenses, or they could be the unexpected delays. And having a bit of a financial cushion, you can say, can keep the project running smoothly, especially if we come across a situation like this, right? So, moving on to the next technique, that is reducing the project scope. Now, if after all this, the project is still over budget, right? Now, say you implemented all the above factors and the project is still over budget. In this case, you need to revisit the scope. Are there any low priority tasks that can be postponed or eliminated altogether? You need to consider factors like this. Now, you need to make your project more efficient financially, right? You need to negotiate with stakeholders to find a way to reduce the scope while still delivering the core project goals. Now, what you're going to do over here is you're going to focus only on the main goal or the core task of the project, rather than, like previously we discussed, we had the basic needs, the performance needs, and the delighters, right? So you can say whenever we come across a situation like this, whenever we have to face a situation like this, we are going to focus on the basics. And if we still have budget further left, we're going to focus on the performance needs. We're going to skip the delighters until and unless we have more budget, right? So these two areas should be our main focus. Then our next technique is to seek process improvements. Now, can we standardize certain tasks to save time and money? Right? Is there any double handling of work that we can avoid? By constantly seeking smarter, faster ways to do things, you can make sure the project stays lean and efficient. So this is basically what the process improvement techniques are. Then the last one, what we have is analyzing variances between forecasted and actual spending. So throughout the project, it is crucial to keep a close eye on actual spending versus the forecasted cost. Forecasted costs are nothing but our predicted or estimated cost, right? So, whenever you start a project, you will have some sort of amount in mind that you have to complete the project in this particular cost, right? So, this is your forecasted spending, or you can say predicted or estimated cost, right? But what actual expenditures are happening while you are proceeding with your project, those are your actual spending. So, you need to always keep an eye, you always need to monitor the variances between your forecasted and your actual spending. If you notice any deviations from the budget early, you can make adjustments on the go, right? Which will help you prevent major cost overruns. So, if you keep analyzing this continuously, there is a very high probability that you do not come across a situation like this. You're going to have a detailed analysis of where you are spending more or where the major expenditure is happening, right? So, these are some of the cost cutting techniques that you can implement when dealing with a budget cut. It's all about getting creative, keeping things efficient, and ensuring the most important parts of the project stay on track. So, moving on to our next question. This is again a scenario based question, which says a key report you've developed has discrepancies in data. How would you investigate and resolve this issue? So basically, you are a business analyst now in a company and you have developed some kind of report, and that report has discrepancies in the data, and you get to know about it. Now, the main question is, how would you resolve this issue? So, your first step ideally should be to verify the source of data, right? You need to double check if the raw data itself is accurate and complete, and it will just make sure that there were no errors during data collection, right? So, you're going to start from the very scratch itself. The very first step that you had incorporated, you're going to verify if that particular step is correct or not. Then you move on to reviewing the data transformation process. This means that you need to look into how the data was processed, step by step, from raw state to the final report. It is possible that something went wrong during a formula application or maybe a data cleaning step. Right, there could be n number of possibilities. So you cannot just turn a blind eye to any one of the steps. You need to make sure that you go through to each and every step and you validate it, you review it, and you figure out if there was any sort of error through the process. Then the next step is to check for missing or duplicate entries. Whenever your data has some sort of missing or duplicate entries, it could skew the results, right? It's common for small errors like missing data points to cause big problems in the final report. So, this needs to be checked thoroughly. Again, you can emphasize on how you would check for missing values, like you would use pandas or maybe the particular query you would use for checking the missing value. You can elaborate on that if asked by the interviewer. So, once you check for the missing values, now the next step you can do is check for the calculations or the formulas in the report. Are all the formulas correct? Have you applied them properly across all the data sets? A mistake here can easily cause discrepancies, so you need to rerun them just to be sure, right? You can just quickly run all your formulas again and make sure that they were all correct and they were producing the right results. Now, to further investigate, you can also compare this report with the previous data. That is, you have to cross check this with the historical data. You can check if anything looks unusually different, right? Sometimes spotting trends or inconsistencies can help pinpoint the problem. Then you have to consult with relevant stakeholders as well, like the team handling the data input or the system management. You need to understand if there have been any recent changes that might explain this discrepancy. After identifying and correcting the issue, you need to revalidate the report and you have to ensure everything now aligns properly, right? So once you have gone through all this, you need to make sure that you revalidate the report, and this time the report does not have any discrepancies. You have to make sure that you correct all of it. And then you can go ahead and document the entire process for further reference, and you can share these findings with your team so that it can be prevented from happening again. That's the entire point of documenting it, right? So this way the process becomes a lot smoother and the report stays reliable from moving forward, right? Moving on to our next question. This is also a sort of scenario based question, which basically asks you, what methods do you use to measure the success of a business solution after its implementation, right? So basically, a business has already launched a product or a service or an application, whatever it may be. And now your task is to measure the success of that particular product, right? Is the product doing good? Is the product doing bad? How are the people liking it? You need to consider all that and come up with say a conclusion whether it is successful or not, right? So here are some of the criterias, or you can say techniques, that can be used to measure the success of a business solution, right? So the first one is key performance indicators, or KPIs. So these establish measurable metrics such as revenue growth, cost reduction, or customer satisfaction to track the performance of the product or the service, right? So this is the main goal of KPIs. Then the next one is user feedback. So again, the term itself is very clear. You need to collect qualitative feedback from users to evaluate the solution's effectiveness and usability, right? Then you have your ROI, that is return on investment. You need to calculate the ROI by comparing the solution's benefits against the costs. Now, whatever money you have spent on the project during its implementation, you have to compare all that with the benefit this product is giving the organization, right? So once you compare that, you will get a return on investment, that is how much return you're getting on your investment. If it is a good number, then your product is definitely doing good. But if the return on your investment is not as good as the amount you invested on it, then maybe your product is not doing that well, right? Then you have your process efficiency. So process efficiency is basically analyzing the time, the savings, the resource optimization, or even the improvement in the operational efficiency, right? Then you have your quality assurance metrics. So these assess the defect rates, the error reductions, or the system downtime to ensure the solution meets quality standards. Then you have your customer satisfaction scores. So your customer satisfaction scores can be tracked using surveys or net promoter scores, also known as NPS. This is net promoter scores, or other metrics to understand the customer satisfaction with the particular solution, right? Moving on to the next question. Now here the question is, describe how you would approach developing a business model for a new product or service. So now this question is a little different than our previous one. We had a situation where our solution had already been implemented and we just had to track the success of it. Now over here, we have to develop a business model for a new product or service, right? So this is like the previous step of the previous question, right? So the first one is to understand the market. You need to research the industry trends, target audience, competition, and market needs, right? To develop a business model for a new product or service, you need to start by diving into the market research. This will give you a very clear picture: what's trending, who are the competitors, and more importantly, who is the ideal customer, right? You need to figure out who is going to be most interested in buying your product or your service. Then you also need to figure out the unique problem your product or service is solving. Why should people care about it, right? Then you have to move on with defining the value proposition. What unique problem does the product or service solve? This is how you position your product in the market, right? Understanding the market is basically understanding your competitors or even your users, right? And defining your value proposition is basically what problem your product is solving. You need to map out how you're going to make money, right? Then the next step is to identify the revenue streams. Now, by revenue streams, I mean, how is your product or your service going to generate income? So you need to map out how you're going to make money. There are several models out there and you need to find the best fit for your organization. It could be a subscription model, it could be a one-time sale, or it could be a freemium setup with premium features, right? There are hundreds of models out there. You also need access to the cost structure. What's it going to take to build, market, and deliver this product? Having a clear understanding of the expenses is very crucial to ensure profitability, right? You can estimate an idea of your profit only and only if you have an idea of your expenses, right? Then the next one is to assess the cost structure. You need to identify the key expenses like production, marketing, operations, etc. You need to have a very clear understanding of where your expenses are going to be the most and where you can have some sort of cost cutting in your entire project plan, right? Then you have your customer segmentation. Now, customer segmentation is basically defining the specific groups who would benefit most from the product or the service. You need to define the different groups that would benefit the most from your solution. Are you targeting businesses? Are you targeting individual customers? Or maybe it could be a niche market. You need to figure out the best way to reach them. It could be through online platforms, it could be through retail stores, or it could even be a direct sale, right? So all these criteria should be very clear right from the very beginning. Then you have your channels and distributions, which is basically you need to figure out how you're going to deliver your product or your service to the customers or the end users, right? How is your product going to reach them? It could be through distributors, it could be through wholesalers, it could be directly. So there are again n number of factors that need to be very clear right from the beginning. Then you have your key partnerships. You need to identify the potential collaborators, the suppliers, or the partners needed for success. Partnership plays a huge role. You need to look at who could you collaborate with, right? And then you have your key partnerships. Again, partnerships also play a huge role. You need to look at who could collaborate with your product. Who could it be a supplier, could it be a distributor, or even a strategic partner, right? You need to find someone who can add value to it. And you also need to keep in mind the scalability factors. How can this grow in the future without compromising any sort of profitability, right? You can also test and validate your product using MVPs or MVPs are basically minimum viable products, or you can pilot the programs to validate the assumptions. Then, lastly, we have the refine and iterate. So, you need to continuously improve based on your customer feedback and the market changes. Right? You need to be very flexible with your approach. You need to constantly monitor what the users are liking. Are they happy with your product? Are they neutral, or are they having any sort of complaints with your product, right? According to that, you need to proceed and you need to keep implementing the changes. You need to keep making your product better. So moving on to our next question, which is again a scenario or situation based question. So it goes like, how do you ensure that a solution is scalable and sustainable for future business growth? So now what we're focusing here is basically our organization or our business has already launched a product or service, and now we want to ensure that that particular solution or that particular product is scalable and sustainable, and our business can have a future growth for that particular product, right? So the basic steps that we need to follow is, first one is a modular design. So we need to break that particular solution into manageable independent components for easy scaling. And by scaling here, we mean growth, right? So scalability basically means the ability to change size or the scale of a product, right? So when it comes to making sure that a product is both scalable and sustainable, you need to start by thinking in the long term from the very beginning. You need to look at the bigger picture. You need to ensure that the solution is modular in design. And you can do that by breaking the solution down into smaller independent pieces so that as the business grows, you can easily expand the system without having to rebuild everything from scratch. Next thing you need to focus on is automation. Now, automation is basically the process of automating the repetitive tasks so that the system can handle more work without requiring a lot of additional manual effort. So one example of automation is the 24 into 7 customer support that is available on so many e-commerce websites today. For example, consider Myntra or Flipkart. Whenever you want to raise a complaint and you need assistance for that, you do not have to wait for a person to guide you through it. You can just go to the chat option and it is done through the automation process, right? So it reduces the manual effort required. Next, we have cloud-based infrastructure. Now, as we discussed that we would like a solution that is both scalable and sustainable. So this becomes very easy with a cloud-based infrastructure. If a solution is cloud-based, we can easily scale up the resources or scale down the resources based on demand. And this can be done automatically also. So both our requirements are met over here, where the cloud-based infrastructure can automatically scale our resources up or down based on the demand, which helps in managing the workload efficiently. Next is choosing future-proof technologies. Now, future-proof technologies basically means that choosing the right technology which does not go out of demand or it does not get outdated very soon, right? You need to find the tools and platforms that are adaptable to new trends or innovation. You don't want to invest in something that will be outdated in a few years, right? Then the next step is to continuously test for performance. You need to regularly test to identify performance limit, right? So that's where the testing comes in the picture. Then you need to monitor and continuously optimize your solution. You need to implement real-time optimizations or improvements to your solution so that you can easily identify any potential issues before they become bigger problems. right? Continuous optimization is a key over here. It makes small improvements over time to keep things running smoothly. Then comes the planning or plan for growth stage. Develop a long term strategy aligned with business growth plans. That's what needs to be your key over here while in the planning stage. Then comes your sustainability practices. You need to integrate energy efficient systems and resources saving processes for long term viability. You need to think about sustainability from an environmental and resource perspective too. You need to use energy efficient infrastructure and processes that don't just support your growth but also do it in a responsible way. Right? It also needs to be cost effective at the same time. So, this is how you can ensure a solution that is ready for future growth and remains effective for years to come. Moving on to our next question. How do you perform a cost benefit analysis for a business decision? So, in order to perform a cost benefit analysis, or you can say a return on investment ROI, you need to follow these steps over here. First of all, you need to have a clearly defined goal or decision that you have to analyze. Once your objective is clear, you can proceed with identifying the costs and the benefits. So, your relevant costs could be the labor or the manforce required, the materials, and even the training that you will have to provide in order to get your work done, right? And now your benefits could be the revenue generated through the product or the service, the cost savings, wherever you could save some expenditure, or even your efficiency improvements. So these are the costs and benefits that you need to analyze. Then comes monetizing these costs and benefits. You need to assign a monetary value to both the costs and the benefits for an accurate comparison. Now, whatever factors we just discussed while we were identifying our costs and benefits, you need to give an estimate value to both these factors. So, this will help you to further compare your cost and benefits for a better analysis. The next step is to set a time frame. You need to determine the period over which the costs and benefits will increase over time. So you need to have some sort of time frames criteria set, right? Then comes a net present value or NPV. You need to calculate your NPV by discounting future cash flows. Don't worry, we'll look into it in detail. Then comes your break even analysis. This identifies when the benefits will surpass the cost. That is your ROI is really good over here, right? You have a great return on investment, that is also known as break even analysis. Then comes your sensitivity analysis. This tests the different scenarios and their impacts on the results. Then comes your decision recommendation. This uses the findings whether to proceed with the decision or not, right? So let's look at all these factors in a little more detail. So once you gather all the possible costs, you do not have to just consider the obvious ones like we talked about, like buying the equipments or hiring people. You need to consider the less obvious factors as well, like the training, potential downtime, or any risk factors involved, right? So this is also known as your hidden cost. You need to consider all this while you identify the cost. And for benefits, you need to answer the question, what are we gaining? This could be anything from increased sales to higher productivity. And just like the cost, you need to quantify these benefits in real numbers. Basically, you need to put a rupee value on each and every factor. So once you have all these gathered, you need to compare them. It's not just about looking at the present picture, but you need to think long term, or you need to look at the bigger picture over here. So the basic question you need to answer is, how will these costs and benefits play out over the next year or even 5 years, right? So this is the bigger picture we're looking at. 5 years, this value could go up to 10 years as well, right? You need to make sure you've covered everything. You need to imagine different scenarios, like what happens if the costs are higher than expected, or what if the benefits take longer to materialize. This comes under sensitivity analysis, right? And then finally, based on all this data, you make a solid recommendation. You need to recommend whether the benefits outweigh the cost and if this decision is truly worth pursuing. This is where you give a conclusion or your final statement or understanding from all the cost benefit analysis that you've performed. So, this is even how you make sure whether you're on track for smart and strategic business moves, right? So, this was all about your cost and benefit analysis. Moving on to the next question. What role does data analysis play in your approach to problem solving as a business analyst? So now the main question over here is, how do you integrate data analysis in your day-to-day job as a business analyst, right? Or how does data analysis help you in the problem solving approach as a business analyst. That's what the question means over here, right? So you need to follow these few pointers to answer this question in a detailed manner. So the first one is data driven insight. So data analysis, so basically we're talking about how data analysis helps us as a business analyst, right? So you need to mention that data analysis provides objective insights or informed decision making, which would otherwise not be as easy or as possible, right? The next step is to identify the root cause of the problem. So you need to analyze the patterns and the trends to identify the underlying causes of the issues. Next comes forecasting. So forecasting is basically predicting the future outcomes based on the historical data. This helps us to prepare for the challenges, right? Then we have performance measurements like the KPIs and the other factors that we discussed previously in our previous question. So we need to keep track of all these performance measurements to monitor the impact of our implemented solution. Then whatever solution we've implemented, we also need to keep optimizing it, right? We need to refine and optimize solutions by evaluating data for continuous improvement. So we need to keep a close eye, or we need to keep monitoring our data so that we can optimize our solutions more efficiently. Then comes risk mitigation. This helps us to assess the data to uncover potential risks and helps us in creating mitigation strategies, right? Then we have our stakeholder communication, which basically helps in clear communication with the stakeholders. So when you provide a clear data-backed insight and when you present it to anybody, even your stakeholders, the communication becomes more effective, right? So that's basically the goal over here. So you can say that data analysis plays a huge role in how problem solving can be approached as a business analyst. You can think of it as a roadmap, and without it, you wouldn't have a proper navigation, right? That's how data science helps business analysts. So you can even consider, or you can even give an example of a drop in sales scenario. So rather than guessing, you can look at the numbers to find the root cause. So instead of making blind guesses like it could be the marketing or it could be the product, you can actually look at the real numbers. You can actually find the root cause over there. It could be a pricing issue, or it could be a seasonal trend, or it could be n number of things, right? So data will help you see all these patterns and uncover what's really going on. And the truth is, it does not stop at just identifying the problem, right? So data analysis does not just stop at identifying the problem, it also helps in predicting what might happen next. So this is done by using the historical data as we just discussed. It can analyze the past trends and it can predict the future outcomes. It could help in preparing for an increase in demand or avoiding potential pitfalls, right? So it works both ways. So we can say predicting, and the fact that you can also rely on data to measure how well a solution is working, right? When you continuously monitor the data, you can also measure the performance metrics like the KPIs and understand whether your implemented solution is working or not. If it is not, you can tweak your strategy, you can implement some change, you can optimize your solution for better results. So data not only helps in approaching problems methodically, but it also gives the fact needed to make decisions, optimize solutions, and communicate effectively with the stakeholders. So this should be a basic approach to answering these kind of questions, right? Moving on to the next question, how would you use SWOT analysis to assess a new business initiative? So SWOT basically stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, right? So how would you use this strategy to identify or to analyze a new business initiative? So strengths basically identifies the internal advantages of the new initiative, like the unique capabilities or the resources. The weaknesses analyze the internal limitations that may hinder success, like lack of experience or resource gap. Then we have our opportunities, which explore the external factors that can be leveraged. It could be market trends or untapped customer segments or untapped market opportunities. Then we have a threat. These assess the external factors that can negatively impact the initiative. It could be the competition or the regulatory changes. Then finally, we come up with an action plan. So this is done with the help of all the insights that we gather from our SWOT analysis, which guides us with the help of strategic decisions. It capitalizes on the strengths and opportunities, while it also addresses the weaknesses and right? So whenever you're assessing a new business initiative, you need to look at the strengths. That is, you need to identify the internal advantages, so you know your strong points or where you guys do not need to put in extra effort, right? What internal advantages that you have can give this initiative a competitive edge, right? So whenever a product has some sort of advantage, it automatically stands out from the rest of the products, giving it a competitive edge. So once you have figured that out, it becomes easier in the marketing strategy as well, right? The right marketing can really give a good awareness about your product and also a competitive edge, like we discussed, and make your product stand out. Or maybe your internal advantage is not about the product, but maybe your team. You could have a great team with really good expertise and key resources that your competitors do not have, right? So these internal advantages need to be clearly identified and worked upon. Then you have your internal limitations, that is the weaknesses. So this is all about being honest, right? You need to be honest about where you lack and what are your shortcomings. There could be gaps in the capabilities that could hold you back, right? So maybe you're stepping into a new market where you don't have much experience, or you lack the technology needed to scale quickly. It could be a number of things, right? So you need to have an honest introspection about your team, your product, and everything that revolves around your product. Next comes the factors that can be leveraged, which are the opportunities. So this is where you look at the outside world. What trends are working in your favor, or what are the current trends that people are preferring? Maybe there's an emerging market that you can tap into, or perhaps there could be a customer preference towards which, or maybe there's a customer preference shifting towards exactly what your initiative offers. So you need to have a clear idea of all that is going around in the market regarding your product. Then finally comes the risk that could negatively impact the initiative, that is the threats. So these are the external risks, things like competitors launching similar products or changes in regulations that will make it harder for you to operate. So once you have a clear understanding of all these factors, you can then use the insights to create an actionable plan. Then that is where your action plan comes in the picture. So the goal is basically to leverage all your strengths and opportunities while actively working on minimizing your weaknesses and protecting yourself from the threat. So it's all about seeing the full landscape and making sure you're prepared for whatever comes in your way. So that is what SWOT analysis helps you in accomplishing. Moving on to our 16th question, what steps do you take to ensure data accuracy and consistency in your analysis? So this is a typical data science question. So this is technically a data analysis related question. So you need to mention all the technical terms that are considered in data analysis and give the answer in technical term, right? So the first step is data validation is basically when you check your data during the entry or the import itself, and it ensures data follows the correct format and the rules. So this is the first step. When you're loading the data, you need to have it validated. Then you have your data cleansing. So you need to identify and fix or remove inaccuracies, duplicates, or missing values. So this is the basic step of data cleaning. You need to take care of the missing values, duplicates, or maybe the wrong formats, right? You need to have your formats right, like the date. Like you need to check formats like dates, floats, integers. All these formats should be in the proper method. Then you have your standardization. So you need to ensure that all your formats for dates, units, names, etc. across the data set are at the same scale, right? That's what standardization means. Then you have your cross verification. You need to compare data with source documents or cross check with other data sets for consistency. Then comes your version control. You need to maintain the records of data updates to avoid conflicts and track changes. Then comes your automation. You need to use automated tools or scripts to ensure consistent data handling, and this also reduces human error. The human error could arise in simple places like maybe a wrong formula or wrong addition or a wrong data entry. But when it is done through automation, all these errors are nullified or taken out of the picture. Then lastly, you have your audit trails. So these keep logs to track who accessed or modified the data, and it improves the traceability. If you have a proper detail to who accessed the data at which point, it becomes very easy to track any sort of errors or mistakes that arise in the data. So whenever you're working with data analysis, you need to make sure that your data is accurate and consistent. it is basically the foundation of any meaningful insights, right? If you work on the entire data set, you get a result, and after that you realize that your data had some sort of error or some sort of discrepancy, your entire result becomes wrong, right? So it would again not give any sort of insight to the business or not help in predicting any sort of value, right? So you need to start with data validation. You need to make sure right from the very moment the data comes in that it follows the right rules. It needs to be in the correct format. It needs to have values within an expected range. Then comes data cleansing. This is where you go through and handle any issues like duplicates, missing values, or obvious mistakes that are clearly visible, and you can correct them there and there itself. Then comes your standardization, is basically applied in cases where, say, you have, for example, a data containing 0, 1, 0, and you have some sort of currency over here. Maybe it could be 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, and so on. Right. And now when you go and perform any sort of operation on this data set, you will have a lot of skewed results. The reason being, the range over here is 0 to 1 and the range over here is 30,000 to 50,000. It is a huge gap. So this is where you need standardization, right? This will help you get all your data set on the same scale. It could be between 0 and 1, or it could be between -1 to +1, right? So this is how standardization helps in getting your data on the same scale. Then you have cross verification. So this is again an important step because this step double checks the data against other sources or documentation, and it makes sure that everything lines up and makes sense. So it is like a way to catch inconsistencies that might have slipped through. Then you have your version control. So this is used to stay on top of any changes made, right? So if any updates or modifications happen, you can easily track them and you can know exactly what was changed by who and when, right? So version control is again also used in Google Doc. As you might have seen that you can see the previous version of your document, and in that version you can see the timestamp and you can see who changed it, right? The person. So this again becomes a very important factor when you need to keep track of. It's very helpful. Then you have your automation. Automated checks, like we discussed, they reduce the human error and keep things very consistent. And for accountability, you need to maintain audit trails. So audit trails are basically a sequential record that details the history and events related to a specific transition, or you can say an entry, right? This helps you know who touched the data, and it sort of adds an extra layer of security to your data. So that is all about ensuring accuracy and consistency in your analysis when you're performing data analysis techniques. Moving on to the next question, how would you handle large data sets when conducting a business analysis? So obviously when you're a business analyst and you have to handle data sets, obviously they will not be just 100 rows or 5 columns, right? They're going to be huge data sets having large amounts of data stored in them. So when you're working with massive data sets, things can get really complicated, right? But you need to follow smart approaches, like you can say data sampling. So we'll start with data sampling. It is again a very simple but very efficient method. So what basically happens is, instead of taking the entire data set, instead of considering all these 1,000 rows, you are going to take samples of maybe say 100 rows or 200 rows at one point, right? You're going to take a smaller but a representative sample. So this will help you test hypothesis quickly without being affected by size. So this is again a very efficient technique, and I personally prefer using data sampling. Then you have your ETL processes. So ETL basically stands for extract, transform, and load. So this is a cleaning and organizing technique. So before you dive into any analysis, you need to work with what you really need, right? So this is done by ETL. You can extract, you can transform, and then you load only what is needed, right? So moving on to the next step. So when your data is really huge and you need to break it down into simpler or smaller chunks, you will also have to aggregate your data later on. That's where data aggregation comes in the picture. So you need to summarize or group your data to identify the trends and patterns, and this will reduce the amount of data you have to sift through. Sift as in like you have to go through, right? Then you need efficient tools. So of course, having the right tools can be a real game changer. You need to rely on high performance analytics tools like SQL, Python, Hadoop, right? So these are the efficient tools that you can use in the process of data analysis. These tools will make it easier to process the large amounts of data without slowing down the process. Now, if you're dealing with large data sets on a daily basis, another efficient technique would be to use cloud solutions. As we already discussed, cloud solutions or the cloud infrastructure is very helpful when you automatically want to scale the resources up or down, right? These solutions will give you scalable storage and processing power, which means you can handle even bigger volumes without having to worry any hardware limitation, right? Then lastly comes your data visualization. So once you have your data cleaned and processed, you can visualize the data using tools like Tableau, Power BI. There are even some libraries in Python like Matplotlib and Seaborn, which you can use for visualizing your data. So these tools will help you make sense of the data, giving you clear visuals that are easy to analyze and share. So by using these methods, even the large data sets can be tackled very effectively and still give you the clear insights that you need to derive for the business decisions. Moving on to the next question, what is the Moscow method, right? So the M over here stands for must have, the S over here stands for should have, C over here stands for could have, and W over here will stand for will not have, right? So this is the Moscow method basically. So now that we've broken down, let's look at each abbreviation in detail. So must have are the non-negotiables, the absolute essentials. So these are the most important tasks that you cannot live without, right? Without these, the project simply cannot go live. You can think of them as the foundation, right? So the must have is like the foundation. Then you have your should have. So these tasks are important, but they're not essential, right? They're not critical. If you can't fit them in right now, it won't break the project, right? But it could cause some pain points or workarounds in the future. So, right, if you do not implement these, there could be some pain points or you can say some sort of trouble. But again, they're not critical or it won't severely affect your project, but there could be some sort of repercussion. Then you have your could haves. So these are nice to have items, right? If you have the time or the budget left over, they are totally worth adding. But leaving them out won't cause much impact, right? So not much impact, but they are nice to have, right? Lastly, you have the will not have. So these tasks do not provide any value, right? So these are the things you agree to put on hold for now. Maybe they'll make sense in the future, but in the current timeline or in the current situation, they are not necessary. Now we're talking all these in product or service term, right? So the Moscow method is clear, I hope. And moving on to the next question. What is COTS in terms of business metrics? So COTS basically stands for commercial off the shelf products, right? So these are the products, it could be hardware or software, that have already been developed and are ready for you to use, right? They are ready for, you can say ready-made or available for purchase and use. So your business does not need to spend time or money in building something from scratch or in customizing it, right? It reduces the cost, time and effort required to build custom stuff. So it is designed to meet the general needs of many organizations. Commercial off-the-shelf products are basically designed to meet the general needs of the general audience. It could be large organizations or even the general public. It's basically like buying a pre-built house instead of constructing one for yourself, right? So COTS solutions are designed to address general business needs that many companies share. Like for example, you can consider the payroll software. Let me just write it down. You can consider the payroll software or even the customer relationship management system or CRM. So these applications need not be modified or customized according to companies as such, right? They are going to fulfill the basic role that they're designed for. The payroll software is basically to manage the salaries of the employees or maybe even the paycheck, right? So it will not need a lot of customization. The only thing that's going to change is the data inside each software. So these are a perfect example of commercial off-the-shelf products. So having these products makes them very cost effective, and because you do not have to invest in custom development and they can be deployed much faster since they're already built and tested, right? So that is why they are much faster. So but like we discussed, but as we know, every coin has two sides, and same is the scenario with this COTS solution. There are trade-offs or you can say cons associated with it. So while these solutions save time and money, they often come with a limited flexibility, right? You you may not be able to tweak or customize the product to exactly fit your company's requirements. Plus, there's the integration challenge. Now, what is this integration challenge? You need to get these off the shelf products to work with your existing systems. Now, this can be something tricky, right? You need to integrate everything according to your organization, and these products are completely general based. And in terms of maintenance, the good news is the vendor handles the updates, the bug fixes, and the upgrades, which takes a lot of pressure off your team. But on the other hand, you are dependent on the vendor now. Which means if they stop supporting the product or go out of business, you're again in a tough spot. So in the business world, COTS solutions or COTS product can be a go-to for companies which are looking to save time and money. But again, it is very important to weigh the benefits against the limitations, right? So another question that could be framed around COTS could be maybe a scenario based question, and the interviewer could ask you whether you would prefer a COTS solution in this case or not. So you need to analyze everything, you need to give all the metrics and then come up with a conclusion, right? Then comes our next question: explain the RACI matrix or RACI matrix. So RACI matrix is basically a tool that is used to clarify the roles and responsibilities in a project or a process. So RACI basically stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. Now, responsible is basically the person who does the work to complete the task. Answering your question, who is responsible for executing the task? Accountable is basically someone who is accountable for the completion of the task, or the person who is ultimately answerable for the completion of the task. Then we have consulted, people whose input is sought before a decision or an action, right? You would need a senior, or you would need somebody higher than you who needs to be consulted before every decision is made, right? And then you have informed. You need to keep somebody informed or updated about the progress or the decisions of the task. So these are the informed people. So this is what a RACI matrix looks like. You have your task and you have your person A, B, C, D, and all these persons are going to have some sort of criteria which could be responsible. So person A is responsible for task 1 over here, whereas person A is consulted for task 2, and you can see person D is informed on task 4, and similarly we have person B accountable for task 2, consulted for task 1, right? And we have person D responsible over here for task 2. Similarly, person A is responsible for task 1 and task 4, right? So this RACI matrix helps us to understand the various roles, and it avoids confusion, and it also makes the project more easy to manage, right? It ensures accountability in tasks and decision making, and it reduces the project delays due to unclear responsibility. So once you have everything cleared, that who is responsible for which role and which responsibility is to be completed by which person, there are lesser delays in the project, right? So it brings a sort of structure, you can say. The RACI matrix brings a sort of structure to a project, and it makes sure that roles don't overlap, right? So now we can see in this role clearly which person is supposed to do which task, and you can see person C has nothing to do with task 2, right? It is completely blank over here. So person C is not associated with task 2 in any manner, right? So there is no overlap of tasks and everything is super clear over here. Then we have our next question: what is RTM? So RTM basically stands for Requirement Traceability Matrix. It is like a project's roadmap to make sure that you're not missing any turns along the way, right? It tracks the fulfillment of requirements throughout the project lifecycle. It helps to ensure that no requirement is overlooked or forgotten. So ideally, every RTM or Requirement Traceability Matrix, every requirement gets a unique ID, right? So every requirement traceability matrix or RTM gets a requirement ID, which is a unique ID, kind of like a name tag, right? So next to that, you write a description of what the requirement is all about. You need to give the details in a very descriptive manner. Then you link it to a specific test case, so you can verify that it's been properly implemented, right? Lastly, there's a status column to show whether the requirement is done, completed, or not started yet, right? So these are the basic components of a requirement traceability matrix. Let's look at an example. So as you can see over here, here is the requirement ID or the unique ID. And here is the description. So it is a landing page, it's a login page, and it's an email unsubscribe button. Then you have your test case ID. Justification is optional over here. You can add these details in the description itself. And then you have your test case ID, and then you have your status, which is also called as test results. And again, these notes are optional, right? So the main components are clear. And so let's summarize our requirement traceability matrix quickly. So the RTM helps you to track all the requirements from the moment they're written down all the way through testing, ensuring that every single one is addressed, right? So that's the basic functionality of RTM, or requirement traceability matrix. Then your next question is, what is stakeholder matrix? So stakeholder matrix is also known as stakeholder mapping or stakeholder analysis matrix. So it is basically a tool to categorize the stakeholders by the interest and influence in a project, right? So stakeholder matrix basically helps you to position all the different stakeholders involved in a matrix so that all their roles and positions are clear, and so that you can communicate with your stakeholders based on your stakeholder matrix, right? So it will help you to categorize all these people on based into 4 groups. So the stakeholder matrix will help you categorize all the people or all the stakeholders involved into 4 groups based on 2 main criteria, that is power and interest, right? So how much influence they have and how interested they are in what we're doing is how we categorize them. Influence is power, and their interest, or how much interested they are, is their interest level, right? So someone with a high influence and a high interest is somebody who's going to manage the team closely, right? They could be the key decision makers or the sponsors. They're going to be actively managing the team. So according to the matrix, if a stakeholder has high influence or high power and also has high interest, then they are someone who is going to manage you closely or your team closely. They're going to actively manage you and also be really close to every decision that is made, right? They could be your key decision makers or sponsors. Then you have somebody who has a high influence but a low interest, right? So you need to keep them satisfied. So a stakeholder who has high power but low interest is somebody that you need to keep satisfied, right? It could be your upper management or somebody who isn't involved in your day-to-day tasks, but you want to keep them satisfied, right? You will not overwhelm with a lot of details, but you will just have a good performance rate of yours according to them, right? Then you have somebody who has a low influence or low power but a very high interest, right? So you are going to keep them informed, right? It could be your team members or the users who need to be kept informed because they're eager to know what's happening, but again, they don't have the power to make big decisions, right? Then you finally have somebody who has a low power or low influence and low interest as well. So they are just going to monitor you with very minimal effort. So they do not need much attention, but you can't ignore them entirely, right? So this is what basically the stakeholder matrix is. So our 23rd question is, explain the Agile Manifesto. So the Agile Manifesto is basically a set of principles that guides the software development towards flexibility, collaboration, and customer-focused delivery. So customer satisfaction through early and continuous delivery is the main motive of Agile Manifesto. The goal is to create efficient, adaptive, customer-centric development processes. So the Agile Manifesto basically has 4 core values that help shift our focus to what really matters, right? It puts people and interactions above just following the rigid processes or using fancy tools, right? At the end of the day, it's all about teamwork and communication. The next one is a working software rather than comprehensive documentation. So instead of spending tons of time on documentation that may never get used, the Agile Manifesto focuses on working software. The idea is to build something that works first, right? Then we have cooperation or collaboration with the customers rather than contract negotiation. So collaboration with customers is prioritized over sticking to contract. Instead of arguing over what's written down, you work together to solve problems as they come up. Then finally, it emphasizes on responding to change rather than following a plan. So there needs to be some sort of flexibility. If the situation changes, you adjust, because in reality, things rarely go as expected or as planned, right? So the manifesto has 12 guiding principles, and these help the teams to work in a way that keeps the customers happy. It encourages teamwork and also allows to quickly adapt to the changes, right? So these are the 4 core values, and you can look up the rest and maybe explain in the interview in more detailed manner, but this is the overview of what the Agile Manifesto basically means. So, at the very core, Agile is all about delivering value faster, improving continuously, and making sure that we're building something that meets the customer's real needs. Right? Moving on to our 24th question. What do you mean by velocity in Agile methodology? So, velocity in Agile measures the amount of work a team completes during a sprint, typically calculated in story points or hours. Right. So, velocity in Agile methodology basically provides a historical view of team performance, and it is like a speedometer for the team. It helps to track how much work it is usually measured in story points or hours, right? So you can think of it like a team's productivity score, which will give you an idea of the capacity over time, right? So basically, how it works is at the end of a sprint, you look at the total story points that you have finished and add them up, right? So this will give you the velocity. It is basically the total story points, right? So, say for example, if a team completes 30 story points, then 30 becomes the velocity score. So, this is all what velocity means in Agile methodology. Now, why does this matter? Why do we need this metrics in the first place? So, velocity will help you set more accurate goals for future sprints so that you're not overcommitting or underutilizing your time. It's like a tool for realistic planning, right? You can look at the previous sprints to predict how much you can take on the next one, and you can also make sure that you're delivering value without burning out the resources. So, overall, velocity isn't just about competition or pushing harder, it's more about understanding your pace and adjusting plans to match what you can sustainably achieve. So, with every sprint, you refine your velocity score and use it to get better at planning and delivering, right? Then we have our last question for this particular video, which is explain sprint burn down chart. Now, a sprint burn down chart basically visualizes the remaining work across a sprint, which helps the teams to monitor progress, right? It promotes transparency, accountability. It identifies the bottlenecks early. Bottlenecks are basically the pain points or the errors, the potential errors that can arise, right? And it also supports data driven decision making. So, a sprint burn down chart is basically like a visual roadmap of your sprint. It shows you how much work is left to complete and if you're on track to finish on time. So, imagine a chart where the x axis is the number of days in the sprint and the y axis. So, just let me use my pen. So, over here, the x axis is the number of days in sprint, and the y axis over here, this is our x axis, this is our y axis. It is the amount of work left in story points or hours, right? So we're calculating our work in story points over here. So the chart has two main lines over here. The ideal line is the straight line. This is our ideal line, the yellow one, which is showing us where we would like to be at any given point if everything goes perfectly, right? So this is our ideal line or how our work should flow in a project. Now the actual line is our red line. So this is showing our actual progress, how much work is actually being completed each day, right? So if we are on track, we are matching with our yellow line. If we are behind schedule, we go above the yellow line, and if we are ahead of schedule, we go below the yellow line, right? So this is basically how the sprint burn down chart is visualized. So every day you update the chart with the amount of work remaining. If the line dips below the ideal, it's a sign that you're ahead, and if it is above, it might mean that you're falling behind. So this way the chart makes it very easy to see whether you're on track or if you need to adjust. So now why does this chart matter? So basically it provides transparency, right? Now transparency is in turn going to help you keep track of your progress, and it is going to make the understanding or the responsibility of tasks easier for everyone on the team. Right, it will also help you spot any issue early on, like if a task is taking longer than expected. Right, it will also keep you accountable and aligned, helping you stay focused on your goals throughout the sprint. So, this is all about sprint burn down chart, and this is all for this video. And if you want to know more about the course, do check out Intellipaat's website or call on the numbers displayed. Thank you and see you in the next video.